A street can be legally registered as a full postal address and measure less than 3 meters end to end. That is not a loophole or an oversight. It is a documented fact, and it is one of 13 cases we are examining today where urban infrastructure stopped making conventional sense. Behind each case is a decision, not always a bad one, not always an intentional one, but always a decision with consequences that outlasted whoever made it. A pedestrian passage barely the width of a hand has held legal status for over 200 years. A roundabout runs in opposite directions simultaneously and is statistically among the safest intersections in the country, which forces the question of whether everything we assume about traffic flow is actually correct. A boulevard 140 meters wide was built by erasing entire city blocks and displacing thousands of families because someone in power decided scale was its own justification. Then there is the street where residents flatten themselves against walls every day as a working locomotive passes 40 centimeters away. And a city of 732 castles that was constructed in full, furnished and fortified, with no one ever living inside it. And a road that London officials designed from a desk without knowing, or without checking, that the ground beneath it dropped away in a vertical cliff. 13 entries. Each one is a record, an anomaly, or a failure that became permanent. The facts are verifiable. The explanations are more complicated. Number 13 is a street that fits exactly one person. Number 1 is the moment the ground gives way, not metaphorically, but literally in seconds. Number 13 on our list is a street you can cross in a single stride, and that is not a figure of speech. Ebenezer Place in Wick, Scotland, measures exactly 2 meters and 69 centimeters from end to end, making it the shortest street on Earth according to the Guinness World Records. 1 address, 1 door, 1 sign. That is the full inventory of everything it contains. The paradox deepens when you consider how deliberately it came into existence. In 1883, the owner of the Mackay Hotel was registering his building with local authorities when he ran into a bureaucratic obstacle. The narrow corner facade of the property had no official street address. Without an address, he could not legally hang a restaurant sign on it. His solution was to register that thin strip of pavement as a standalone street in its own right, complete with a name and a postal identity. The council accepted the paperwork. What had been an anonymous wedge of stonework became, overnight, a recognized unit of urban geography. The physical reality of the place is quietly disorienting. A traveller who does not know to look for Ebenezer Place will walk straight past it. There is a dark red brick wall, cobblestones underfoot, a tight angled facade with a single door, and a small blue street sign fixed to the masonry. No depth, no vista, no room to linger. The street begins and ends before the mind has time to process the transition. Guinness certification turned Wick, a modest harbour town on Scotland's northern coast, into an unlikely entry on the global tourist circuit. Visitors now arrive specifically to photograph themselves beside the sign and to take the one step that constitutes a complete end-to-end traverse. Every centimetre of those 2 meters 69 has been walked, documented, and posted online thousands of times over. Our next entry competes for a record of an entirely different kind and has held it unchallenged for more than 300 years. The world's narrowest street is not an accident of urban planning gone wrong. It was designed this way on purpose, as a tool to stop fire from spreading. That counterintuitive truth sits at the heart of Reutlingen's Spreuerhofstrasse, number 12 on the global list of extreme urban records, and the officially narrowest street on Earth. At its tightest point, it measures 31 centimeters across. You do not walk through it so much as edge sideways and hold your breath. The origin of this gap traces back to a single catastrophic night. In 1726, a fire tore through Reutlingen with the kind of force that rewrites a city's logic. When the smoke cleared and reconstruction began, municipal authorities introduced a new rule. Certain buildings would be separated by intentional breaks, narrow corridors engineered directly into the rebuilt street plan. These were not aesthetic choices. They were containment strategy. Empty space deployed as a firewall, gaps designed to starve a future blaze of the continuous fuel it would need to jump from structure to structure. The passage we now know as Spreuerhofstrasse was one of those gaps. For nearly a century, it existed without formal identity, a functional void rather than a named place. Then, in 1820, Reutlingen's municipal records caught up with the reality on the ground, and the passage was registered as a proper public street, despite being barely wide enough for a single person walking sideways. Today, visitors come specifically to test it. They angle their shoulders, inch forward, and discover that passage is possible, but only barely. The timber-framed walls press in from both sides, the sky narrows to a pale stripe overhead, and the experience registers somewhere between claustrophobic and absurd. What fewer visitors notice is the quiet structural problem developing along one wall. One of the old half-timbered buildings that defines this record-breaking gap is leaning, slowly and steadily, inward. The wooden beams are deteriorating. If the lean continues unchecked, the street will lose not just its world record, but its navigability altogether. The danger is unhurried, but it is not hypothetical. The most famous crooked street in the world was never meant to be famous at all. Lombard Street in San Francisco's Russian Hill neighborhood, ranked number 11 on our list, exists in its current form not because someone wanted a landmark, but because a hill was too steep to drive up. Before 1922, this block ran straight down at a 27% grade, one of the sharpest inclines in a city already notorious for its hills. Horses struggled. Early automobiles stalled or lost control. Something had to change. Engineer Carl Jensen's solution was geometric rather than structural. Instead of flattening the hill, he proposed winding the road across it. 8 switchback curves over 180 meters brought the effective gradient down to 16%. The street became passable. The decision was entirely practical, the kind of municipal engineering fix that usually goes unnoticed. But the specific shape that utility demanded, a slow, sinuous descent framed by hydrangea beds and backed by views of San Francisco Bay, turned out to be visually irresistible. The red brick pavement caught the light. The curves invited the camera. A postcard image had been created by accident. Today, up to 2 million vehicles navigate those 8 turns every year, and the paradox has become impossible to ignore. Lombard Street was engineered to solve a traffic problem. It has since become one of the city's most persistent traffic problems. Residents of the surrounding homes have spent years lobbying for tolls or outright closure to vehicles. The noise, the gridlock, the daily procession of tourists on foot and behind the wheel have made ordinary life on the block nearly untenable. A street built for convenience became an inconvenience for everyone living on it. That is what happens when an engineering compromise accidentally becomes beautiful. The solution outlasts the problem it was meant to fix, and fame arrives as a penalty for getting it right. A street should not exist the way Baldwin Street exists. That sentence sounds like an exaggeration until you stand at the bottom of it and look up. Number 10 on our list, this residential road in Dunedin, New Zealand, climbs at a gradient of 35%. Meaning the surface rises 35 meters for every 100 meters of horizontal distance. The Guinness World Records certifies it as the steepest residential street on Earth. But the most remarkable thing about Baldwin Street is not what it is how it came to be. The answer lies in a London office in the 19th century. British cartographers tasked with planning the layout of Dunedin drew a standard rectangular grid across their maps. The grid was logical, orderly, and entirely indifferent to what the ground actually looked like. Nobody in that room appears to have consulted detailed elevation data for the hills of New Zealand's South Island, or if they did, nobody adjusted the plan accordingly. The lines landed on paper perfectly straight. On the actual terrain, some of those straight lines became near vertical climbs. Baldwin Street is the most extreme product of that indifference. The street runs for approximately 360 metres, but its physical reality demanded engineering compromises. The lower sections are paved with standard asphalt. Higher up, the surface changes to concrete. This is not an aesthetic choice. On warm days, softened asphalt on a 35% slope will slowly migrate downhill under its own weight. Some houses along the street have interiors levelled horizontally against the hillside, which means their exteriors appear subtly tilted when viewed from the road. Every year, the street hosts an endurance race up its length and a festival built around rolling chocolate sweets down the slope. Thousands of tourists photograph themselves from the base, the perspective compressing the incline until the road looks almost vertical in the frame. What they are photographing, without always knowing it, is a monument to colonial planning assumptions. The conviction that a grid drawn on flat paper translates cleanly onto any landscape. Baldwin Street is what happens when that conviction meets a hill and nobody blinks. A city painted blue to keep demons away, and it worked so well that millions of people now travel thousands of miles just to walk its streets. Chefchaouen, number 9 on our list, sits in the Rif Mountains of northern Morocco, and its entire historic centre is soaked in blue. Not one blue, but hundreds: indigo, cobalt, turquoise, slate, chalk white shading into violet. Every shade is a private choice made by a different hand on a different wall. The city was founded in 1471 as a military stronghold against Portuguese expansion along the Atlantic coast. For centuries, it was a functional Medina: tight alleys, flat rooftops, the smell of leather and cumin. Then the 1930s changed everything. A wave of Sephardic Jews fleeing escalating persecution in Europe arrived and settled here, bringing with them a tradition deeply embedded in Jewish practice: painting their homes blue, the colour of the talit, the Jewish prayer shawl. In Jewish tradition, blue carries the sky, the presence of God, and protection against harm. Street by street, the colour spread, but here the history gets complicated. Historians still argue about how far the Jewish influence actually reached. Some scholars point out that blue appeared beyond the Jewish quarters, and that local Berber and Arab residents embraced it too, for their own reasons. In Moroccan folk tradition, blue repels evil spirits and holds back summer heat. The same colour, two overlapping meanings, one city transformed. By the mid-20th century, the Medina had become something singular. Today, the municipal government actively enforces the tradition. Repainting walls is part of official urban policy because the city long ago understood that its colour is its identity. The light does the rest. Morning turns the walls pale and silver. Noon bleaches them almost white. Evening deepens every surface toward indigo. The labyrinth shifts with the sun, which means no photograph of Chefchaouen ever quite looks like the one before it. The roundabout that terrifies newcomers is also one of the safest road junctions in Britain, and that is not a coincidence. Swindon's Magic Roundabout, built in 1972 to the design of engineer Frank Blackmore, ranks 8th on national records for low accident rates, and the very features that make drivers freeze in confusion are precisely the ones keeping the crash statistics down. The junction works like this: 5 small mini roundabouts arranged in a ring around a single large central roundabout. The outer mini roundabouts flow clockwise, as any British driver would expect. The central roundabout flows counterclockwise. That reversal is not an error, and it is not an eccentricity. It is the load-bearing logic of the entire system. When a driver enters the junction for the first time, the brain looks for the familiar pattern and finds its opposite. The result is hesitation, reduced speed, and heightened attention at every point of entry. Multiply that effect across 5 separate decision nodes and you have a junction where nobody is going fast enough to cause serious harm. Locals, who gave it the name borrowed from a beloved children's television program, navigate it almost unconsciously after enough repetitions. Habit rewires perceptions so completely that what once caused paralysis becomes routine. Visitors, by contrast, often pull to a stop mid-approach, scanning for a logic that seems to be missing. The psychological discomfort is real, but it is doing structural work. Transport authorities have consistently recorded low casualty figures here, and traffic engineers studying the site point to the same mechanism. The complexity that unnerves the driver is the same complexity that forces careful behavior. A wide, simple intersection signals permission to accelerate. This one never does. Blackmore's design made perceived danger into a safety instrument, and the name that stuck, Magic Roundabout, carries more accuracy than irony. There is something genuinely strange at work in Swindon. It takes longer to cross this street than to board a subway train. That's not a complaint. It's engineering. The Avenida 9 de Julio in Buenos Aires, number 7 on our list, stretches 140 meters from one sidewalk to the other. In most European capitals, a city block measuring 100 meters is already considered wide. Here, that's just the distance between curbs. The avenue didn't grow over time, it was imposed. Construction began in 1937, and the method was simple and ruthless. Demolish whatever stood in the way. Entire blocks of colonial-era Buenos Aires, 19th century buildings, courtyards, churches, family homes, were cleared to carve this corridor through the historic centre. Thousands of residents were displaced. An urban fabric built across generations was severed by a single administrative decision, and the process stretched across decades before the avenue reached anything close to its final form. At its centre stands the obelisco, 67 meters of white concrete, erected in just 31 days in 1936 to mark the 400th anniversary of the city's founding. The speed of its construction was itself a statement, and that statement was the same one behind the entire avenue. Argentina in the 1930s was not building infrastructure, it was building an image. The country wanted to look modern, powerful, proportionate to the great cities of Europe. The result exceeded every expectation and created a problem pedestrians deal with daily. Today, the avenue carries up to 20 lanes of traffic, divided by green median islands. Standing on the sidewalk, the scale is genuinely disorienting. The far side looks like it belongs to a different neighborhood. The Avenida 9 de Julio is less a street than a proof of concept. That ambition, applied to concrete, can reshape an entire city's relationship with itself. 732 castles, not ruins of war, not the aftermath of a plague. Just 732 miniature chateaux sitting empty in the Turkish mountains because a currency collapsed and a deal fell apart. That is Burj al-Babas, and it may be the most disquieting monument to modern finance that you can actually visit. The site sits in Bolu province, a forested highland region in northwestern Turkey where the air is clean and the hills roll green through most of the year. The developer, Sarot Group, broke ground in the mid-2010s with a clear target market. Wealthy buyers from Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE who were expected to turn this mountain corner into a high-end resort enclave. The design language leaned hard into fantasy: pointed spires, leaded glass, turrets that silhouette against the sky like something between a fairy tale and a luxury brochure. Each villa was identical to the next, all 732 of them. The math looked promising for a while. Deposits came in, construction moved at pace, the total project value ran into hundreds of millions of dollars. Then 2018 arrived, the Turkish lira lost a catastrophic share of its value, diplomatic relations with several Gulf states deteriorated sharply, and buyers began pulling out of their agreements. Sarrett Group was left holding debts reported at around $27 million and had no path forward. Bankruptcy was declared. Work stopped mid-build. What remained is what you see now. Some facades are complete. The interiors behind them are hollow. Fountains stand dry. The footpaths between towers have gone to weed. No lights come on at night. No one walks the streets at dawn. The repetition of one architectural form across hundreds of hillside plots creates a sensation closer to a rendering glitch than a neighborhood. The same object, copied and pasted until the eye can no longer process it as real. This is number 6 on our list, a place built as a dream and left as evidence that capital moves through landscapes faster than people ever could. A single coat of pink paint changed the fate of an entire street, and that is not a metaphor. Rua Nova do Carvalho in Lisbon's Cais do Sodré district, now globally recognized as Pink Street and ranked number 5 among the city's most iconic nightlife destinations, was, until the early 2010s, one of the most dangerous and deliberately avoided corners of the Portuguese capital. The transformation was not accidental, and it was not gradual. For decades, Cais do Sodré was shaped by its proximity to the docks. Sailors, transient workers, and the informal economy of a working port left their mark on the neighborhood, and Rua Nova do Carvalho became its roughest edge. A strip of disreputable bars, street violence, and a reputation that kept tourists away and kept local residents walking a different route home. Travel guides did not mention it. City officials preferred not to. Then, in 2011, Lisbon's municipal government made a decision that was equal parts urban policy and visual provocation. They painted the entire surface of the street in a saturated, unmistakable fuchsia pink. The logic was deliberate. Colour was chosen as a signal before infrastructure, because a signal travels faster than a renovation permit. New bar licenses followed. Designers moved in. A different crowd arrived, one that had never had any reason to come before. The visual effect delivered something that urban planners rarely manufacture on purpose. A setting that looks, especially at night, as though it exists slightly outside of ordinary reality. Wet cobblestones reflecting neon signs against that pink ground produce an image so inherently photogenic that it functions as its own publicity engine. That feedback loop, striking visuals, generating photographs, generating visitors, generating more photographs, is now inseparable from what Pink Street is. The story of Rua Nova do Carvalho is ultimately a story about how identity can be reassigned and about the surprising efficiency of colour as an instrument of urban change. Which raises the next question. What happens when a city doesn't retrofit colour onto its streets, but builds its entire character around one hue from the very beginning? 40 centimetres. That's the gap between a moving train and the bedroom window of someone's home on Train Street in Hanoi. Not a museum exhibit, not a theme park spectacle, a measured, documented fact on an active rail line that has been running through this residential alley in the Old Quarter since the early 20th century. This is number 4 on our list. The line was built by French colonial engineers as part of an infrastructure project linking Hanoi to the south of the country. At the time of construction, the surrounding land was open enough that a railway through the area seemed like straightforward logistics. What the planners did not account for was a century of unplanned urban growth pushing steadily inward. Decade by decade, 2-story colonial houses crept closer to the tracks. Balconies extended. Walls rose. The city filled in every available gap until the railway corridor became, in effect, a shared living space. The clearance at various points along the alley ranges from 40 centimetres to 1 metre, tight enough that passengers on older rolling stock could theoretically reach out and touch a windowsill. By mid-century, the alley had developed its own domestic rhythm around the train schedule. Laundry lines crossed above the rails. Children played on the stone ground between departures. Residents set out chairs and small tables in the margins, eating and socializing in a space that would be considered unsafe by any modern urban standard. The trains came several times a day, and life adjusted around them rather than yielding to them. The situation reached global visibility around the mid-2010s when photographs and videos of cafes operating literally between the tracks went viral worldwide. Tourists began arriving specifically to sit at tables a metre from a passing locomotive. In 2019, city authorities shut the cafes down, citing safety concerns. The alley itself remained open. People still live there. The trains still run. What changed was only who was allowed to serve coffee while it happened. The world's narrowest street is not a relic sitting forgotten behind a museum. It is a functioning municipal road, registered, named, and slowly disappearing. Spreuerhofstrasse in Reutlingen, Baden-Württemberg, measures just 31 centimetres at its tightest point. That is narrower than a standard sheet of A4 paper is wide. And right now, that measurement is under threat. The gap between the two half-timbered buildings exists because of fire. In 1726, a catastrophic blaze tore through the medieval centre of Reutlingen, consuming entire city blocks. When authorities oversaw the rebuilding, they made a calculated choice. Preserve a narrow break between structures as a firebreak, a buffer designed to stop future flames from jumping between buildings. That sliver of space was never filled in, never built over. In 1820, the city formalized what had existed for nearly a century and officially designated it a street. It got a name, a sign, and a place on the map. For 200 years, the record held. Now, one of the walls that defines the western edge of the passage is leaning inward. The timber frame of the building, more than a century old, has suffered wood rot. Load-bearing elements have lost rigidity. Under the weight of the upper floors, the structure is migrating toward the gap at a rate of millimeters per year. Stand at street level and the walls appear perfectly vertical. Tilt your gaze upward toward the roofline and the illusion breaks. The two facades are converging, slowly, like the covers of a book being eased shut. If the gap closes below 31 centimeters, the record is gone. If the lean reaches a critical point, the passage becomes physically impassable. Engineers are monitoring the structure. Municipal inspectors examine the load-bearing beams periodically. But full restoration of a listed half-timbered building in a protected historic core is expensive, technically complex, and slow. The street that survived the 1726 fire, that outlasted centuries of change, is now losing ground. Not to flames, but to gravity and time. That is number 3. Up next, a place where a full-size passenger train runs close enough to apartment windows that residents could, theoretically, hand something to the driver. The world's widest street is designed in a way that makes it nearly impossible to cross in a single attempt. That is not a flaw in the planning of Avenida 9 de Julio in Buenos Aires. It is, in a sense, the point. At 140 meters across and 20 lanes of active traffic, this avenue holds the official record as the widest street on the planet. The name itself signals ambition. July 9th is Argentina's Independence Day, and the avenue was conceived not merely as a road, but as a spatial declaration of national scale and will. The builders wanted something that could not be ignored, something that made the size of the state legible in asphalt and distance. They succeeded. For a pedestrian standing at the curb, the consequences of that success are immediate. A single green light lasts only a matter of seconds, far short of what a person walking at a normal pace would need to reach the other side. The crossing is broken up by narrow median strips, thin green islands planted between the lanes, and these function as mandatory rest stops. Locals understand this instinctively. The crossing takes at minimum 2 light cycles, with a compulsory pause on a strip of grass while traffic rushes past at arm's length. Visitors who don't know the rhythm regularly find themselves marooned at the halfway point, watching the light change, standing close enough to moving vehicles to feel the displaced air. At the center of the avenue, where it meets Corrientes, stands the Obelisco. Built in 1936 for the 400th anniversary of Buenos Aires, this white stone needle rises 67 meters and is visible from nearly every angle of the city center. It marks point number 2 on our route. In an environment that reduces the human body to a small thing moving between enormous flows of concrete and cars, the Obelisco provides the only fixed visual reference, a landmark that orients without offering any particular safety or shelter. The scale that makes it monumental is the same scale that makes standing near it feel, on foot, like a minor act of courage. People sit at cafe tables wedged between the walls of their homes and an active railway line, and that is not a metaphor. Hanoi Train Street is a residential alley in the city's old quarter, ranging from 40 centimeters to 1 meter wide, running flush against tracks that carry real freight and passenger trains to this day. Twice a day, those trains actually come through. The reason this exists at all is colonial infrastructure. When French engineers laid this railway line at the turn of the 20th century, the surrounding neighborhood was sparse enough that clearances weren't a concern. What nobody calculated was how densely the old quarter would eventually pack itself around those tracks. By the time that became obvious, the houses were already there, the line was already operational, and the two simply coexisted, right up until today. Standing in the alley before a train arrives, the preparation is almost ritualistic. Cafe owners fold tables, press customers flat against walls, and clear the passage in seconds. Children and cats vanish. Then the ground begins to vibrate before you hear anything. When the sound arrives, it isn't noise in the ordinary sense. It's a low-frequency, concussive roar contained in a stone corridor, something you feel in your chest more than hear with your ears. The train passes close enough to measure the gap with your hand. The pressure wave from the carriages physically pushes people. A wave of heat from the engine and the metal chassis floods the alley. Your ears block. 30 to 40 seconds later, it's over. Tables come back out. Coffee gets poured. The alley returns to what might generously be called its baseline state. That combination, the mundane and the extreme, occupying exactly the same square meter, is what put Train Street at number 1 on this list. It isn't a theme park attraction or a film set. It is a neighborhood where people live, work, and drink coffee at tables that need to be cleared twice daily to let a locomotive through. No other street on the planet quite manages that particular equation. A street can be 31 centimeters wide and still be a street. That's not a metaphor. In Reutlingen, Germany, a passageway barely wider than a human shoulder has been a functioning public thoroughfare for nearly 3 centuries. It exists not in spite of its absurdity, but because of it, a stubborn architectural accident that outlasted every reasonable argument for its demolition. 13 streets, each one a decision made at a specific moment in history, still alive in brick, paint, asphalt, or sheer obstinacy. Why does Lombard Street in San Francisco twist through 8 hairpin turns on a single block? Because in the 1920s, a resident engineer looked at a 27-degree slope and proposed a solution. The solution worked. The solution became a landmark. In Dunedin, New Zealand, Baldwin Street holds the title of the world's steepest residential street for a reason that has nothing to do with geography. London planners simply copied their standard grid onto a map of hills they had never seen. The Chefchaouen question. Why is an entire Moroccan mountain city painted blue? Turns out to have an answer rooted in grief and displacement. Not tourism strategy. The magic roundabout in Swindon looks like a traffic engineer's breakdown. 5 mini roundabouts orbiting a central one, yet its accident statistics consistently outperform conventional intersections. Fear, it turns out, makes drivers careful. Avenida 9 de Julio in Buenos Aires is 16 lanes wide. That number was a political ambition before it was an engineering specification. Burj Al Babas in Turkey is a ghost development of hundreds of miniature Gothic chateaux, frozen mid-construction when the company went bankrupt, now being quietly consumed by vegetation. Rua Nova do Carvalho in Lisbon was a red light district until the city painted the cobblestones pink. The economics of a neighborhood shifted because of a color. And in Hanoi, the train street runs so close to residential buildings that locals learn to schedule their lives around the timetable. These aren't curiosities, they are the physical record of human decisions. Brilliant, absurd, imported, and imposed, that refused to stay in the past. If this episode showed you one street you didn't know existed, hit like. It's the clearest signal you can send us that these stories are worth telling. Subscribe, because the list of places where ordinary space turns out to be anything but is still very long.